Jason, how you been, man?
Eric, I am doing awesome. How about yourself? Great to
good.
see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. It's I think we're going to have these episodes are going to be stretched further and further apart, maybe potentially based on what our current travel and work situation is. But it's good to check in every once in a while. I remember the frequency of these conversations was pretty regular there for quite a few years,
Yeah.
and now we're I feel us kind of drifting apart a little bit.
And not in a bad way, like we don't want to talk. It's just, life's getting in the way. In
true.
a good way, right? I think.
Yeah. So I just came back from a trip, and I know you're headed on a trip. So I went with Laura and actually her mom and her sister, and we went to Europe and spent close to 2 weeks there, that's a pretty long vacation for us. And actually, it was interesting. I had this kind of realization as we came to the end of the trip. I was just talking to Laura, and I was like, "How are you feeling?" Because she's getting ready to part ways from her job in just a couple of months here at the end of December. The 31st is going to be her last day. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, okay, how does this feel to you now? Because for her, typically in the fall, and I'm sure you remember this too, like as a scientist, she was doing the whole conference season. So fall was really busy with a lot of travel, and we just wouldn't see each other, and the kids would be playing sports, and it would just be, we'd be dividing responsibilities and everything. And so as this vacation was coming to a close, I asked her how she was feeling. She's like, it's weird. I haven't thought about work at all, which maybe not surprising, but also just that sense of freedom that we had. I'd typically be kind of, a little bit sad that the trip was coming to an end. And of course I had that, but there was a big part of me. I was like, what's next? I'm really excited for the kind of freedom that we had bought for ourselves as we get ready to kind of transition to early retirement, instead of that kind of sense of urgency, like, okay, what emails am I going to come back to? What meetings are stacked up? What presentations do I have to get to? Not having to return to something like work felt really good, even though we're technically both still working. It has me excited for this kind of transition period, but it also has me kind of wondering, like, how much of our happiness and our sense of self is, tied to this pressure of work, and what it's going to feel like to really step away from that. Is it the freedom that actually just, like, is that going to make us happy? Is that the core thing that is going to be driving us to happiness? Or is it just something that we kind of quickly adapt to and kind of take for granted? Freedom might just be the absence of, kind of one kind of constraint. And just, I know myself, the human mind is always kind of seeking problems. And so do we just kind of inevitably find another constraint? How would you speak to that? Because you're year 5 of early retirement.
There's a lot there. And first of all, I'm super happy that you're back from your trip, and that it was as good as you'd hoped it would be, and that you and your family had a wonderful time, and that, importantly, it's got you really thinking about what retirement will look like for you and Laura and the rest of your family. And that's just a cool thing to kind of see you getting a sneak peek of that. Maybe the first idea to get out there is, for sure, retiring doesn't make you happy. I think we've seen enough evidence of that, and in my experience is not that sort of life magically transforms. I mean, yes, depending on how much you loved, or the other end of the spectrum, hated the kind of work you did, and I was not in the latter category, you will feel different levels of sort of satisfaction, relief, and all of those things. But just like suddenly coming into a large sum of money, that doesn't create happiness, but it does create a space in which you can do things that maybe you didn't have time for that will bring you happiness. I mean, one of the earliest episodes you and I did was we just went around Reddit and kind of collected these stories of people in the fire community who regretted their fire path, either because they were on the path still and they were making sacrifices that they didn't like anymore, or maybe never liked in the first place. And then on the other side, what we're talking about more here is people who finished up with that job that they didn't like, or wanted to, kind of put behind them, and found themselves in retirement and were very unhappy. So, certainly we have enough data that retirement doesn't create happiness. And I think it's just a great discussion point, because I do worry based on how much I see this discussion of as soon as I get this job behind me that I don't like,
Right.
or the corporate grind is over, I'm going to suddenly be happy. And I think that's just not true.
Yeah, what's one thing that I've been thinking about, and just as I think about this transition point, and I think, okay, how do I plan for this, and how do I make sure that I don't fall into that trap of feeling dissatisfied with the life that I've now have? That's work has, now it's a void. One of the things that I've been thinking about is that, the idea about freedom is that you appreciate it so much more when it's kind of a scarce resource, right? In your working life, you have weekends, maybe you have a couple of weeks of vacation, and those things, it makes those things feel really special because they're so limited. Just get a couple of weeks, or the weekend maybe is gobbled up by all of the responsibilities and obligations that you've put off during the week. And so you start to crave those things. You crave a weekend, you crave that vacation because it's so limited. And then I can see how that anticipation, like anticipating even this vacation, like that makes me excited, even the next thing. But when you enter early retirement or retirement in general, that kind of cycle goes away, And so I can see that, when you have all the time you want, when you have all the freedom you want without that kind of scarcity, maybe the excitement starts to dull. And, it's not just the stress of work that disappears, but it's also that contrast, that feeling of excitement, that life is exciting, that might go away too. So I can see for myself needing to kind of, and I don't know if this is true or not, but maybe needing to kind of recreate this cycle of anticipation and fulfillment. How have you found that to be true?
Yeah, so in a sense, but so I guess really partially, and I think unless you are somebody that has amassed such an amount of wealth that you can literally do anything you want at any time, and you have no other obligations, by the way, family or other things that get on your calendar, whether you want them there or not. You're still going to cycle, right? For example, we are going, as you kind of suggested, we're going away very soon, just a few days from now, for more than 2 weeks. Lori and I will be in Peru, and that's wonderful. We are really looking forward to it. We're doing the last minute prep and watching documentaries and just getting excited. And it's true that we are traveling more already. We've already seen our son twice when he's off at college. I'm looking to make plans to see family on the other side of the country. And we can do that in ways we never could before.
Yeah.
But we can't be on vacation every week. We don't have an endless budget for flights. And even if we just want to do everything in the car, we have other obligations to do. So I think, first of all, there's still a very real cycle of exciting things that are out of the ordinary that we're doing. Yes, they're easier to schedule, but they still come and go.
But you think of that as vacation.
I still do, yeah, because it's different than what you're spending the majority of your time doing. Now, maybe if you're truly nomadic and you spend 80% of the year on the road, which plenty of people do in post-fire, and 20%.
That's appealing to me, by the way.
It is to me too. We'll get back to that. 20% at your home base. Maybe that feels less vacation-like, but for us, even though we're traveling more, we're going to be taking more trips, they still seem like a vacation from the things we normally do. And while those things that we do in between are a lot of fun and they can be educational, whatever, I fill my time with a lot of stuff that isn't travel. They're different than going away and exploring a new place for the first time. Do you agree with that? Or are you seeing, when you look at your own kind of near future, how do you think about those different types of things?
I'm trying to square it with my budget.
Okay. Yeah. I get that.
Because you just brought up a very real aspect of this. Like, as I am planning out, Laura and I are planning out the next year, like I'm front loading all this travel. I'm just like, well, I'm young. I'm in good health. We have the money to do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. And it's hard to kind of, pull it back and just say, I don't need to do all of the things that I have been putting off next year.
That's right. You don't.
But my inclination is just go. And I think one of the things about this trip, and I said my Laura's mother was there, and she's getting older and she's getting close to the kind of no-go years, I would say. And we did this trip, planned it for her and with her because we wanted to be able to do this. This is something she's been talking about, and we've just never been able to make it happen.
Yeah.
And so there was some of that kind of forced slowdown that happened during this trip that really, I was a little bit averse to it at first. But knowing that this was kind of our gift to her, really made me appreciate slowing down and not having to tick off all of the boxes. I can come back to this place. I can come back to this country or that country, and I can be there again. And part of that is kind of just learning to pull back and appreciate the time that I'm spending with the people that I'm with, instead of just trying to get to the next attraction, check off a box. And so I think it's going to be a transition for me. Like, I don't have it figured out. Like, I don't know if it's going to feel like a vacation anymore. I struggle with that, man, because I want it to, because I like that contrast.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm trying to figure it out. And I did kind of try and treat this 2-week period as like a mini retirement. I'm like, okay, if I'm here in this space, you know, and this is this time next year, what's this going to feel like? And what would I do differently? And I have some thoughts on that, but I don't have it figured out yet.
Well, and I think that's perfectly okay. If there's nothing else that we get across, you know, to each other or to anyone else who's listening to our conversation right now, I don't think anybody can fully know what things are going to be like once you cross that line, you put the work behind you, and you're completely in this different space. You're getting tastes of it now, both of you, but it is different, and it continues to change. If that's one theme, if I went back and watched, you know, this, what and read, you know, the content that we and I have put together over the past, you know, coming on 4.5 years since I retired, I would see the shift happen and the different highs and lows kind of come through. And I don't think I'm that, you know, much of a special snowflake that I went through it better or worse than anybody else. It is probably pretty typical. And I was able to predict very little of that. So I think, like anything, you're right to be thinking about these things, and any work you can do on them in advance and kind of, I don't know, even talking about with your spouse concerns or thoughts or things you're excited about. I mean, you're that much more likely that when you get there, you'll be like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I thought might happen, and this is okay. But yeah, for me, I'll tell you, it still feels like vacation. I guess one thing that's different, and maybe it touches on something you said about this trip you just took, I don't feel guilty at all about downtime. You know, I'm much more apt now, if we're kind of, you know, we've been hitting it hard out seeing the sights, or, you know, started early in the day, like, let's go back to the room. Like, maybe I'll take a nap. Like, you know, and part of that is aging as well. But I think it's also like an honest, you know, acceptance of, we don't have to always be doing. Like, you know, it's okay to kind of give yourself some recharge time or sit and take in the sights, and you don't have to always be kind of moving and seeing. But
I always thought that was a fail. Like during my vacation, because
I know you did.
But I really did appreciate it more this trip. I can't say that I'm like totally comfortable with it, because I am someone who wants to, like, you know, a couple hours in the hotel room or you know, lazing around is okay with me. But like, I'm probably not going to do that for like multiple days. You know, I'm not there yet. But it does feel, it's like a luxury, man. And I didn't really appreciate it for it being a luxury until this trip. And I can imagine that that will get better with time, when I don't feel so pressed for those things. Yeah.
And I think there are bigger topics here that even go beyond retirement, about, you know, kind of just contemplating what is the goal of travel, just taking that one example, since it's kind of underpinning this conversation. Is it to take in as many new pieces of information, experiences, sensory or whatever, or is it, I'm going somewhere new, I'm going to experience whatever is going to come to me. I'm going to take opportunities that put me in front of things I'm more likely to appreciate and enjoy. But, you know, what's going to happen is going to happen. I mean, obviously it's not a summing up game here, but mentally, I think, especially when we are wired for this 1 week or 2 week, if we're, you know, lucky, vacation we can take while we're working, is we feel like it's a maximization exercise. And it's hard to stop doing that.
Yeah. And I also think in some ways, I guess one thing I'm thinking about with travel in early retirement is it now starting to fill the void of work? In other words, am I just, front loading and pre-programming travel in a place that I should really be populating with a whole bunch of things, social
Right.
relationships, new hobbies, travel plus maybe side projects, volunteering, whatever.
Yeah.
And am I just putting that there because it feels like an easy solution? It feels like a thing where I can get a dopamine hit and go to a new place and be challenged, because I think that's the thing about work that we've talked about in the past, like the challenge of doing difficult things. Travel does provide that in a unique way. If you're going to a place where you don't speak the language and you're figuring out a new bus system or train, or, you're going to naturally be put in uncomfortable situations. And that's appealing to me. It's one of the reasons I like to travel. And so I don't know how you look on that. I know you haven't done as much travel in the past couple of years because you've been more, constrained to home because of your son.
Right. And like you, things are now starting to change because, we're empty nesters. On the same note, I think this year is still going to be somewhere in between where we were before and where we think we'll be, because it is the first year of college for him, and we want to stay relatively close in case, we're needed. It's not going to stop us from traveling, and we're clearly traveling for longer than we have before, but it is still going to be a gradual change. But back to what you just said, I do think that maybe there's a couple things at work here. I mean, one of them is just once you now have the opportunity to do the things you couldn't do before, I think it's a natural inclination to want to try to do them all.
Go. Yeah.
And that is something I struggled with a little bit that was totally unexpected in early retirement. And that was, I felt like if I wasn't filling my time, if I hadn't had it booked up, and I don't mean I was calendaring everything, but if I didn't do that, I felt like I was failing to capitalize on the opportunity in front of me, and I was losing, right? I wasn't doing things right. Now, I think that's a pretty normal reaction, and maybe just hearing more stories of that can help you and others avoid that, or at least maybe reduce the time that you spend in that mode, because you'll see it coming. But I do think for many people, and I'm not saying this is you, but it's something maybe to think about, and I'd like to get your reaction to. It could be just, well, this is a way to fill time that you might be kind of worried about being faced with white space. Because one thing we do see in people who express regret about early retirement, or even not knowing what to do with themselves in traditional retirement, is, okay, so now what? I've been in this mode 2 or 3 years. We've seen numerous Reddit posts on this.
Yeah. I'm sick of golf.
Bored.
Sick of fishing.
I don't know what to do. I thought I would just fish or golf, and I hate it.
Yeah.
So they're clearly not happy.
Yeah.
They're not able to fill the time.
Yeah, I think you called it out perfectly. I mean, this is exactly probably why I'm running to the space of travel as an easy solution. But I did. So I mentioned I was kind of treating this trip to myself. I didn't announce it to Laura or anyone else I was traveling with, that it was like a mini retirement.
Yep.
I think for me, to your point about like this idea about always having to feel like productive, I'm really, it's one of the things on my personal list that I need to work on redefining the word, what it means to be productive.
Yes.
And that is hard to do.
Is
Because I've always linked that to putting food on the table, a successful business, and those things. And one of the things that I realized during this trip, and I expect that this will change over time, but like writing and photography are really interests of mine that complement travel very well. And I'm starting to think about those in a project-based format and putting like my own set of like designer constraints on those things.
Okay.
Like I can only bring one lens with me. I can only, document the trip. Like in the end, I need to choose 5 photos.
Okay.
And then there has to be like a little writing that goes along with it, and maybe it's a book or something like that. And that's not a fully formed idea, but that's just what I've been playing with now. And that feels, maybe it's not productive because I'm not sharing it with the world. I'm not like making a book out of it. I'm not selling it, but it feels good to me.
Yeah.
And it also expands the surface area of travel into, after the trip. Like I came home from that trip and I was just like, editing all these photos, and I had so much fun doing that. And it's like totally pointless.
Yeah. Well, it's
only
not
for me.
It's not pointless. Well, so you've just said something there that I think is really important, and it manifested what I think might be an interesting realization. And I won't mind if you poo-poo this at all, but you, like many people, have expressed the sentiment, and you just kind of touched on it a little bit in a different way, that one of the ways that we measure personally our own productivity, even if we never share it with other people, is the output of currency. Right? We've done work that generated revenue. It generated income for your family. It put food on the table, as you said. And when we succeed and we earn more, well, we feel like we've continued that journey. And so I think one of the things we need to do in retirement is reframe what that currency is. And I think we can all have different kinds of things that we get reward from. And so, for example, for me, one of the currencies that I knew going into it, but I didn't really realize how profoundly important it was until I was post-retirement, is just knowledge and gaining information and gaining, learning new skills, trying them out, iterating, improving, right? It's very much scientific method stuff. And so one of the things I've done the most of in retirement that isn't travel is just time at the desk, learning a new language, or applying a programming language I know to a new type of problem. We've talked about automating options trading a little bit here on the channel. That's something I've spent a lot of time into. And yes, in the end, hopefully that does generate monetary returns. But quite candidly, just the exercise of learning new scripting languages and figuring out the logic, doing, simple algorithm design, like that's really scratches an itch for me. And to the point where, Lori has rightfully on a number of occasions been like, how much time are you going to spend on this? Because it's like, well, her concern is like, what are you not doing?
The house?
Her concern is what are you not doing that you would enjoy? Are you reading as much as you want to, or are you, whatever creative pursuits? And it's a different kind of creativity for sure. But, my point is, I think we all need to establish what that currency is. And for you, it might be, this kind of creative output and challenging yourself in new ways to produce things that have nothing to do with money. Does that resonate? Do you want to throw darts at that, or?
No, I mean, I think, I knew we were going to be on the same page on that. And I guess what I'm doing now is just seeing some of the things that you've talked about in a new light.
Okay.
Like you've talked about skill building, and I'm like, well, I'm not really into coding. Like that's not for me. I'm probably not going to get into options trading. That's not for me. But when I started to think about travel as being a skill, I realized I'm not really that good at travel. Like I could be so much better at travel. There's how can I incorporate more healthy lifestyle habits into my travel? Eating and drinking. I've done that to excess, and especially in, in a period of hedonism where you're like, all right, hey man, the ships are sailing. We're getting on this. We're going for it.
That's right.
And that's fun, but I can't see building a long-term life in retirement always blowing it out. We've talked about that. So that's a skill I need to work on. Also just being present in the place with the people that I'm with. I looked at I don't know if you ever got into No Reservations with Tony Bourdain.
Yeah, I did.
One of my favorite shows, and just seeing the way he travels and seeing how thoughtful he is about being in a place, that's an aspirational goal for me. Not that I would, I'm not Tony Bourdain by any means, but it's a way of seeing the world that is really interesting to me. And I could see trying to develop that for my own self, just being in a place and experiencing it. And that goes hand in hand with learning how to slow travel, learning how to program downtime, learning how to, learn a different language. All these things for me can fit into that framework and be really satisfying, on top of just the idea of travel in itself being a broadening experience.
I love that idea. I think you've just identified a series of things that are not only good, but they seem like they'd be very good for you, right? Especially someone, like you and like Laura, who likes to travel as much as you do, just learning different ways to do that, and that are going to feel very fulfilling, but also kind of lifestyle wise are going to be positive. I mean, how could can't fault that. I like the Tony Bourdain example because it is about like, a different kind of travel, right? Less just purely observation and more like really getting immersed and appreciating where you are for all the things it offers. And that really does take sometimes some contemplation and downtime and slower pace, right? Not being
it's hard to do.
The tourist just taking
man.
Pictures of yourself in front of the famous object.
Yeah, it really is. It's a challenge. It's a challenge even, and I know you're not really that into photography, but it's a challenge showing up in a place that's been photographed, a quadrillion times and finding a new frame, like turning around and finding something else. And I love that. And that's
there's
very
nothing wrong with that.
Fulfilling. Yeah.
That probably will continue to be important to you. And I
totally.
like that that's something that gives you, intellectual and, creative satisfaction. That's a cool thing. I don't think there's anything to judge about that. I think if it took you out of the other things you wanted to get about travel, that would be very different. But if it's just another facet of why travel is interesting to you, then I think that's cool, and you're just going to have more time to do it.
Yeah, I think it's also like part of this kind of creating a new identity for yourself, like kind of learning to ride the bike again. It's just a different vehicle. I'm like, okay, how do I see myself when I'm not, an architect or a content creator or, I don't know, an author. I mean, like, it's definitely, I see it as being more challenging than I initially was thinking it might be, I've worn all these different hats, but I can see into the future here that there's going to be some examination here that's not going to be pretty.
Well, I mean, I think if, I feel like every episode in 2024 has touched upon kind of this topic of mental well-being. And, I've obviously been on my own journey there, and just, again, I think we can tie the topic of happiness into that, right? Because there's nothing like removing work, the clutter of work, the time sink of work, whether you like it or not, it takes time. And that, once you clear that away, you've got the time for self-reflection and examination more than you did before. And while no matter what, that on net is positive, there's lots of, challenging, inner dialogues to have as a result of that. And that's a reality, right? That's a reality. But I think all of that is a part of the benefit we get from being able to retire at any age, right? Early or not. Early, you just get to start that process sooner, which I think is a very cool and positive benefit. But it also, I don't mean to say that it's not scary sometimes, because it is. But
well, it gets back to that idea of hedonic adaptation, right? Like, you just get used to a certain steady state of freedom, and then you're actually focusing and looking for new problems. And I know you found some things about yourself that you want to improve and make better, and I know you've been working on it, and that's scary to me. I don't know what I'm going to find when I spend more time with myself in a quiet studio or something. That's kind of scary. Maybe that's another reason why I just want to travel, front load all the travel, just keep running.
Well, I mean, maybe. I think fear of that is entirely natural, right? Nature abhors a vacuum, and that includes our conscious brain, right? It's a real thing. But I think if we reframe the absence of work, I don't want this to sound new agey, but this is truly how I think about it. If you reframe the absence of work as opportunity for other things, it's going to get filled, some of that consciously, some of it unconsciously, and all of that on net is a positive thing, because it's stuff you wouldn't have experienced were that time full of the clutter of work, which is largely out of our control unless you solely work for yourself with no clients, right, and have no external influences, which is pretty much not a thing, right? You're working for somebody or with somebody. So I truly do. I think the more you can, and anyone can, embrace that opportunity and just, take advantage of it, it's got to be a positive thing, because it's beneficial to have it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You've always talked about having a structure to your day. Does that apply to more broadly to your life too? Like, okay, we're going to travel once a quarter, or, once a month, or, how does structure play a role in finding happiness in, retirement?
Honestly, it's nothing we've consciously discussed to this point, but I also think having the calendar constraints in recent years, the first 4 years of retirement where basically our son was in high school. So we always had that school calendar that you and I have talked about and experienced plenty. So I think next year that change is really that framework really is going to fall off. And I think it probably behooves us to think more and talk more, Lori and I, about what do big trips look like? Are we going to try to do 2 of those a year? And then how often do we want to do other things? I mean, I know the types of people we are, particularly Lori, we're not going to want to calendar it out in a kind of in a maddening kind of way like that. That will not be, she will not enjoy that. And it's probably not good for me either. But I do think high level, we should really work on that because we do think about travel and the limitations of budget and operating within that budget. And so, we, going back to what we said at the start of the chat, neither of us are setting ourselves up in retirement with unlimited funds for travel, right? It's a big part of our budget because we do prioritize it, but there are limits. So I think it probably does warrant more discussion about, we're going to aim for 2 trips that look like this a year, and this kind of other trips with what frequency, because we do have other considerations, the summer with our son, seeing family X times a year, and we haven't really done that very much to date. How about you? Is it something you guys are actively talking about, or do you have a framework in mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the solutions to my kind of opening discussion about finding this contrast, finding a way of creating that cycle of, here's a trip, here's when we're home from the trip or doing something else. And so having a structure, I can't imagine not having it, but that's just always how I've been anyway. And also trying to thread in, if Laura and I are going to keep operating the business, we want to have that be a real small part of that structure. And so in order to do that, we have to say, okay, these are the milestones that we're going to hit for the business, and this is when they're going to happen, and then fit all the other things around it. And we do have a really pretty aggressive plan mapped out for next year already.
Okay.
And I find comfort in structure. I need that. And I know that you and Lori don't find that same comfort there. But for me, now I know, okay, I can spread these out, and I know I'm going to have some time for editing, and I'm going to have some time to do a little bit of, work for the business here and there. And so to me, I can build this contrasting, a contrast into my life. I kind of like that.
Well, actually, that resonates really well with me because I think I can see for myself, if I had the type of business, going on at some level, even after, you're done with residential architecture and Laura is done with her job in science, you have this thing that you're keeping at a certain level. I think it's really important to partition off the time needed to do that incubation and those things you need to keep it going, because I think of it like the way I tried to approach vacations with the family while I had my old corporate job. I would block out, a time in the morning for myself while my family was asleep, because I'm a morning person, and that's when I would answer emails. And barring an emergency, I wouldn't touch email the rest of the day. I certainly wasn't, dealing with work phone calls or anything. And I had to have that partitioning for them to be happy, as well as for me to be fully engaged, which admittedly I wasn't always successful with. So certainly I think it's commendable that you guys are thinking about that now, and you can kind of look at it as, these are the blocks of the time that are spoken for. Yeah. Everything else is going to be in, that's what's in scope for all the fun. And so I don't think that's a bad idea at all.
Sometimes it helps. It just keeps me, helps me hold up my own obligations to myself too. Like scheduling exercise, I know that's going to happen every day, but I don't do that on vacation. And so that's one of the reasons why I was asking you, do you still look at it as vacation? Because if you're going to be traveling for a couple of weeks, and I felt it this past time, 2 weeks without doing any kind of cardio exercise, anything, it's you start to feel really super unhealthy if you've made it a real part of your life prior to then. And so I don't know. It's one of the reasons why I was asking. You don't schedule that?
Well, I definitely think we try to find ways to either, and some trips are more or easier than others, right? Obviously if it's an outdoorsy trip, hikes are a part of it already. So that's a no-brainer. But I mean, even when we went to see our son, we didn't do such a good job this trip. But the previous one, you know, we went to the gym and worked out because we're a member of a national gym and we can just dip in, in wherever we are. And that's not always going to be the case. So maybe the strength training goes on hold and it will go on hold when we're in Peru, but there's going to be a ton of walking. So, you know, we're going to get that part of what we normally like to do in. But I think I like the idea, and I think we have done a better or worse job depending on the trip. I think Lori's actually very good at being the one to sort of remind, you know, hey, like, you know, let's go for a hike or something. Because
I'm sure she gets up early to do that.
She does not get up early to do it, but she does want it to be a part of our day. And so I do think it can still be vacation. And to your point earlier, you know, the world doesn't fall apart. You don't blow it out every meal. You don't get all the drinks every day.
Wait, you don't?
I mean, not every day. No, there's a time and a place. You know, we are aging. I think we see the impact on our bodies more easily than we did previously.
God,
and we are very far from saints in the way we travel and, you know, eat and drink. But I think we've figured out a decent balance, because to your point, if you're traveling often, you can't be treating it like that once a year trip to Disney where you're like, I'm going to get the drinks every night or whatever.
Well, we haven't traveled together very often then, clearly.
No, but we are going to. I mean, we have a concept for travel together. And I think if nothing else, you will get to see how we approach travel, and how Lori will absolutely tell you if she doesn't want to do something. If you're being all turbo, as she would put it, she'll be like, "No, I think we're going to go do this, and we can meet up at dinner time, and then we'll do that." Like, you know,
yeah, totally.
She's actually, I think, honestly, she's very good about that kind of stuff. Like, you know, even if we're hanging out with some, you know, a family or a group of people for a week or two, we don't have to spend every minute together, because they might want to do things in a different way or at a different pace or a different time than we do. And, you know, I think that's something I've definitely learned from her, is that we all have our own rhythm and needs. And, you know, yes, there's a place for compromise, but sometimes it's like, going to do that, you're going to do this.
Yeah, and I think it's, I mean, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Our trip that we're planning together for that reason, because, you know, to her point, she's never traveled with us, really,
right?
Safe, very minimally. So she doesn't really know how we travel, and we don't know how you guys travel.
Yeah.
We have our ideas on how each other does it, but I do think we're both confident enough travelers that we know ourselves well enough to say, this is where we break. And like, you guys do your thing and we do our thing, but we can come back together and still have that shared experience, and not have it be like Lori doesn't want to get up at 7 a.m.
Right.
and we're, you know, we've been up for 4 hours, kind of thing. So I'm looking forward to that, man. I'm pretty excited.
And to be clear, I don't mind leaving her behind when you guys want to get breakfast at 7:30. Like, I'll be there with you.
Right.
There might be a Bloody Mary involved, but
oh God, yes.
You know, that's fine. Yeah, Lori doesn't like them either. See, that's how you know there's she has problems.
Really?
Yeah, no Bloody Marys.
Oh,
She's okay with a mimosa. She would have that instead.
Yeah, I don't need the mimosa, but
that's fine.
Bloody Mary, I'm good with.
Yeah, it's pretty good,
michelada?
Right?
I like anything with the tomato juice.
I like a michelada as well. A Bloody Caesar. You ever have that?
A Bloody Margaret?
No, a Bloody Caesar.
What's a Bloody?
It's a Bloody Mary, but with clamato juice.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty nice.
I thought that was a Bloody Mare.
I don't know. That's what I thought it was.
M-A-R-E.
I'll have to look it up. Like,
well, it's from the sea, you know, the clam.
Yes, I understand. I like it. I mean, and hey, in retirement, I have grown to appreciate cocktails just a little bit more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. I like a cocktail.
Well, we just came back from a big beer drinking session. Oh my God. I was done with beer by the end of that trip. Holy smokes.
Yeah.
It was a lot of calories.
Some travel is like that.
Yes, can be. Yeah.
Yes, and if it was slower pace, you didn't get to do as much walking as you wanted to.
Yes, that is true. It was definitely slower paced.
You know, you could do jumping jacks and like some jump rope, like Rocky in your room. That would be a pretty good video. Watching you jump rope high speed and like falling over.
Oh God, yeah.
Because I mean, unless you like have trained, no adults can jump rope.
I'm pretty terrible at it.
You just can't. I am horrible at it. It's not going to be a thing.
I thought I'd be better. think it seems like a basic
It's
skill.
so
that I
much
would be
harder
better
than
at.
you think it is.
And it's so tiring. It's like exhausting.
It
man.
turns out it's a really good workout. It's aerobic. It's both aerobic and coordination. That's a terrible combination. It's like hurdling. Like, I have no interest in that. Like, running is fine, jumping is okay, but combining them with an obstacle, that is bound to be pure comedy if you're watching me do hurdles.
Steeplechase.
Steeplechase, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
I
I want to ask you though about your trip to Peru.
yeah.
I'm excited to hear about this. You're going with a group, right? A small
Yeah,
group?
it's the first time we've done any kind of group travel. It's a small group, no more than 12. But yeah, it's the first trip where we haven't had to think about all of the logistics ourselves. And while we like you do enjoy that, it takes time, and you have to adapt in the moment when things don't go right and the rail system is on strike and suddenly you have to rent a car, and those do make for good stories, that kind of adventure. But the idea of somebody doing the heavy lifting, especially when you want to see a lot of a very diverse and fairly large country like Peru, is pretty appealing, especially for a first trip. So we thought this is a good opportunity. It's our 20th anniversary. Let's take that work out of it. We'll just focus on the few things we need to do, like what to bring and what our flights are, and everything else is going to be handled by others. I mean, yes, we'll be responsible for, getting dinner every day, and there's a lot of free time for us to explore. So I think we're hopeful, but we think we're going to get the right balance of programmed time and then totally unprogrammed. We can do what we want, just like we would on any other trip. So
Is it G Adventures? Is that who
it
you're
is,
with?
yeah. So there's a couple of groups like them that specialize in those kinds of trips. So yeah, and they have them in a couple different levels of accommodations as well. We went with the nicer accommodations. They're still not fancy. This isn't like luxury travel, but
It's like chubby travel, would you say?
yeah. I mean, it's inexpensive. I mean, the trip itself, which includes...
It's all relative.
Oh, yeah, okay. So my expectation is a 2-week trip that includes a bunch of meals and experiences and a few flights intra-country would be more than, say, $1,600.
Is that what it... Wow,
yeah,
okay.
a person.
I was thinking it was more than that.
No,
Okay.
it's $1,600 or $1,700 a person. So
wow.
I'm very intrigued. Given how popular this company is and the reviews I've read by them, I'm waiting to be, kind of wowed with what I see, because people do report such good experiences with them, and including on this trip. But
Does that include food?
it includes all the breakfasts, some lunches, and a few dinners, and also a couple of activities like a cooking class.
Oh, wow.
Includes your fees for certain things. Intra-country travel, like there's 2 flights and the train for Machu Picchu. So,
Dude, are you worried?
no, not at all. Not at
That
all.
sounds inexpensive. Yeah.
Nope,
Okay.
I'm not worried at all.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
I mean, if I encounter anything truly terrible, I will live stream it so that everybody can share in my suffering. But no, we're really looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun couple of weeks, and yeah, we're going to get some.
Did you buy insurance?
Absolutely.
Okay, you did.
It is required for many carriers to have travel insurance
Okay.
when you go on a tour.
Nice.
Yeah, which is
Well, I'm
it's
excited to learn
inexpensive.
about that because I was checking out some of their itineraries, and there's a bunch of companies that do this.
Yes,
but
there are.
They did have some interesting itineraries. Just I'm kind of poaching them just for my own travel because I'm not sure I'm going to do the small group thing, but I like the itinerary. Even just looking at the itineraries, it's like, oh, that's a good idea.
Well, yeah, it really is good for idea generation, I think, because
Yeah.
some of these companies have so many tours, and you can.
Yes.
It's just a good way to kind of survey what you might be able to see in a week or two and what makes sense. But yeah, we'll report back. Maybe you'll be converted. And I think there's a time and place for everything too, right?
For sure.
Lori's not keen on the river cruise idea now that some of my friends have gone on and have really enjoyed, but I bet you her opinion is going to change in 5 or 10 years.
Totally.
And if it doesn't,
I expect that.
I'll go without her. Maybe you'll go with me.
Yeah, I'm there.
All
I'll be
right.
there for it. Yeah, cool, man.
Well, I'm
All right,
really
well,
so.
hey.
I mean, I'm glad that you had the idea to talk about this topic. I think retirement is such a important stage of our lives that most of us do experience at some point. we stop working, and then we have a certain period of life left. And for those in the fire community, it could be 2, 3, or more decades.
I'm planning on it.
I'm planning on it too, right? Worst case, I live a really
And
long time.
I'm planning on being happy for it. So.
Happy too. So retirement,
Yeah.
happiness, they got to go together.
All right. Safe travels, man.
You as well.
We'll catch up when you get back. It's going to be a few weeks.
I will.
Till we chat again, right?
It'll be a few pisco sours later, and then I'll tell you all about it.
All right. Enjoy.
All right, man.
Ayahuasca?
Take care.
Is ayahuasca in your future?
I mean, not on this trip, but, one never knows.
All right, man. Take care.
Take care, man. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.